do it.
Breathing in, breathing out. Okay. Can you hear? Okay. So we'll start with 3 sounds of the bell. Come back to our breathing, our body. So dear respected Thai, dear community, so much has happened since we had this class in January. We've experienced a lot of the beginning of the invasion in Ukraine and many incidents of crisis in our climate, as well as the recent shootings in Texas. And I've been using the practices that we've been learning in this class during the past few months to take care of my emotions, look into the beauty of the world, and remember that we still have conditions for happiness in the present moment. That's been my practice, learning how to dwell happily in the present moment. And it's very interesting, today's thesis is on, the tenet is on how our actions of body, speech and mind give rise to this body, but also to our environment. Retribution consists of body, mind, and environment. Actually, body, mind. In Sanskrit, it's nama rupa. So body and mind are not separate. Body, mind, and environment. So it means this experience of body and mind that we are living since we are born is a product of our actions. Also, our environment is a product of our actions. They go together. They are not separate. And it is actually our thinking which creates a separation. This retribution, we'll talk more about that. Body, mind, and environment, and is both individual and collective. Let me just stop there for a moment. So retribution is what we call karma phala, the fruit of our action. Karma is action, and phala is fruit, the effect. So we have karma hetu and karma phala. Hetu is the cause, phala is the fruit. And the fruit can also be the cause, and the cause can also be the fruit. For the purposes of one, for example, when we talk about a flower, we can say that the water, the sun, the earth, the air is in the realm of karma hetu. Karma hetu. And the flower itself, beautifully manifesting, is the fruit, karma phala. So our actions as a gardener, including the actions of the sun and the rain, produce the karma phala, the fruit, which is the flower. And the flower also brings beauty to its environment. So having the flower here on the table is creating a beautiful environment for the talk. And as we are now learning, this teaching is so crucial because when we look at the effect of, for example, carbon emissions on the climate, we realize that, for example, a tree can absorb all kinds of carbon dioxide. Seagrass, algae can absorb and fix carbon dioxide. So they're actually influencing their environment. And that's just one small example of many kinds of ways in which this flower, which we think of as just an individual, is influencing as well its environment. So, for too long we've continued to think of the world being arisen due to just one main cause. I'd say God, or some kind of creator. And the difficulty with that thinking is that we start to think that there's a kind of closed system, that there's all the fruit, all the effects in the world are all just going down and rooted into one original cause. And that gives us the tendency to think that body and mind are separate from our environment, that the subject and object are separate. They are two distinct things. The subject is playing the role of a creator, and the object is the created. So the Buddha had the insight that there are many causes and conditions that give rise to every effect, and every effect contributes as a cause and condition to other effects. And this interweaving web of causes and conditions allows for the interbeing of what we think of as myself and the environment. And this is not just for the sake of description, as I've often said, but it's for the sake of practice. So how do we practice in such a way that we no longer just look at this body as myself, these feelings as myself, this consciousness as myself, but I see that actually there is a constant flux between what I consider to be around this body and mind and what I consider to be inside of this body and mind. There is a continual flow. And so what I think, what I say, what I do is actually going out into the environment and changing the environment. It's creating my environment. We're here at Deer Park, and that's because we had the kind of thought that coming to a place where there are friends on the path that are practicing together, we can kind of surround ourselves with an environment that is wholesome, that is watering good seeds, that we find good spiritual friends that will be honest with us, that will help us to see our shortcomings, but also help us to water the positive things, the positive seeds. So that is that is one way in which our thinking affects our environment. But if our thinking is still very much caught in items of thought that are full of anger, hatred, and violence, even we are in an environment like Deer Park, where people are very peaceful and friendly, but we will look around at that beautiful environment as a place of suffering, as a place of a kind of hell realm. So the second part of the tenet addresses that aspect. This world is the Saha world for living beings, but the Pure Land for Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Saha world, it means the world of dust. The world of suffering, living beings, but the Pure Land for Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So the world that we experience depends on our mind. And this retribution is not just the fruit of what we have done in the past few minutes or the past few days, past few weeks, months. It's not what's on our resume or even the sum total of all of our relationships throughout our life, but they continue in our ancestors, through our society, through our collective consciousness. So we always remember in the Plum village tradition that when we suffer, it is not just an individual matter, but it is part of a collective suffering. And that gives me a deep bodhisattva vow to transform that suffering. Because I know that it's not for me alone. Sometimes we won't work to take such good care of ourselves, but if someone else their happiness is dependent on our actions, then we are able to go deeply and bring up such a kind of great vow to act in such a way that it brings about peace and happiness to others. And that helps me every day to be more peaceful, to be more understanding. I know that the lineage of my grandparents, my ancestors, is informing every action, all my thinking, my speech, and so forth. I know that my teachers, especially Thai, is there and is part of what I'm thinking, saying, and doing. And so I want to be able to go deep and try to give the best of that current of teaching of ancestors to the world. And I know that if I can do that, then the environment can change, the surroundings change. Not just my own personal well-being increases, but the well-being of my brothers and sisters, the well-being of Deer Park, the well-being of California, well-being of not only human beings, but all animals, plants, and minerals can benefit from that kind of bodhisattva action. So that is the beauty of this realization. I don't know that I've looked in many places for this teaching on the individual and the collective. It's so clearly as Thai has done it. I haven't been able to find it. Maybe if someone online who's a good Buddhist scholar, they can research and find where else in the Buddhist tradition this teaching comes. But Thai teaches it so clearly. He gives an image of a candle. When we light one candle, then the light from that candle can spread out and fill, like the candles we have on the altar for Thai. It gives some light. But if we bring other candles there, and we put it together with the one candle, then the brightness increases, and we cannot easily distinguish between the light from this candle and the light from this candle. The collective light increases with all of the additional candles that we add. So this is a way of thinking of individual and collective. We each have our individual consciousness, but that consciousness is not delimited. It is always contributing out to the collective. And the consciousness of others, especially those close to us, are also contributing to the common light. That is retribution, the fruit, karma phala, of our actions. And at every moment we are like candles giving off light through our thinking, speech, and action. So we want to give out the brightest kind of light. We want to see how we can, be like an orange tree giving off wonderful fruit, so that we can, all friends who come along, they just pick the fruit and they have a very sweet experience. That fruit is a retribution. Sometimes this English word puts people off. Like, retribution, it sounds so harsh. It just means that there's a relationship between action and the effect. This is one of the deep realizations of the Buddha when he sat under the Bodhi tree. I just returned from a little more than a month in India, so we had a chance to go to the Bodhi tree. It's actually a descendant of the Bodhi tree that the Buddha sat under. And so, along with Phap Saha, Phap Kai, Phap Tree, and many lay friends, we sat under the Bodhi tree, and it's so magical to sit there. I hope that everyone listening has a chance to go to the Bodhi tree someday and just sit and just look at the beauty of the tree. But you don't need to go to the Bodhi tree to do that. You can go to see any tree in your backyard. It is like the Bodhi tree. And I sat there and I reflected on the Buddha's insight into cause and effect. Just looking into his own mind and observing the environment around him as well, and seeing that everything is due to causes and conditions. Because at that time there were teachers who were saying, it's all just random. There's no particular meaning in any of it. So whether you hurt someone, you don't hurt someone, it's not important. And there are those who said that everything is determined already, so there's no need to practice to change our life. And many other kinds of philosophies and teachings in between. But to be honest, I think the Buddha had the insight that many of those teachers, they just started to give a teaching. Maybe they had some original insight, but then they just keep repeating that teaching over and over again. And rather than looking inside themselves to see what is actually going on. Is it really true what I'm saying? Or does it just sound nice? It's a cool sounding philosophy. Nowadays, whether we adhere to it or not, we follow a kind of materialist, secularist philosophy of life. We look for happiness in things. We can get more money, more power, more possessions, and we look to our neighbor and we see their possessions, their money, their power, and we feel when we're not happy, when we're feeling a little bit sad, maybe we just had a little bit of indigestion, and we look over at our neighbor and think, well, he's got that. Maybe if I get that, I'll be happier. And we just keep increasing and increasing. And that was also a philosophy in the Buddhist time. But if we look deeply, we see that there's no end to that kind of desiring, grasping mind. We see that the moments of happiness and joy that we experience, they are based in letting go, just really experiencing the beauty and wonder of the present moment. And that insight is what brings us here to Deer Park, what brings us here to practice together. So that is both an individual, means our body, mind, and the environment is a product of our insight. If you continue to you might not, when somebody asks you, I don't believe in the happiness and materialist things, but what do you do with your time? What do you do with that money or free time that you have in your life? That's always a great way to look and understand better what is in your heart. If you find yourself going to shop especially for things that you don't need, things that just accumulate, you need to look. You need to look and say, maybe I have a kind of way of living that is the product of the collective consciousness. And I need to go deeper in myself and see what is really going to bring me happiness. So you come to the monastery, you come to the Sangha meeting, and you get nourished by a kind of joy that's not dependent on material things. It feels so wonderful. You're reminded of the joy of just breathing in and out. Not because somebody tells you, but because you experience it together with the Sangha. Just closing your eyes and breathing in and out, and suddenly the cells in your body come alive. You feel at ease. All the stress that comes from trying to accumulate wealth or position or power just dissipate, and you suddenly feel at home, sovereign in yourself. That's it. That joy, that happiness is a retribution. And the more that you look to dwell happily in the present moment, the more that your environment transforms. Without that, my own experience of meditation when I was in my early 20s, I know I wouldn't be standing here now in Deer Park in this beautiful environment surrounded by kind and loving people. So it's very helpful to look around at where we are right now. both inside and outside, and see what are the causes and conditions that brought about this situation right here in the present moment. What are the actions of my thinking, my speech, my bodily actions, which have brought about this body, mind, and environment that I'm experiencing right now. That is a meditation for this 31st tenet. You can listen to the sound of the bell and just use our insight to look in at our present moment condition, both within us and around us. There's a story of a man who is traveling. He has come from a village, and he crosses over the mountain, and he comes down into another village. And when he enters that new village, he meets the mayor of that town, and he thanks him. So he says, your town, as I walked down into it, I saw how beautiful this valley is. The green fields, the beautiful fruit trees, and the people smiling, singing in harmony with each other as they work in the fields and go about their daily life. And they came and offered me things to eat. This is such a wonderful town. That town over there on the other side of the mountain, the people were so unkind. They treated me like a dog, and they wouldn't give me food to eat. And I'm so happy to be here in your town. Thank you so much for welcoming me. And the mayor, smiled and looked at the man and said, I'm so happy that you enjoy our beautiful town. And maybe you might like to stay here for the night, but I have to ask you to move on. We don't have much space here in the town. So tomorrow you'll have to leave. And the man was a little bit dejected. He thought, oh, gosh, I really wanted to stay in this town. But because the mayor said that, he could not do anything. So the next day he went on. And a few days later, another man came into the town, and he said, he said, your town is so beautiful. The fields are green, the trees are beautiful, with lots of fruit. The people are smiling and working in harmony with each other. They gave me food to eat. I just came from this town on the other side of this ridge, and the people there also were so kind and friendly. They gave me food to eat, they housed me. I just have so much gratitude for all the kindness that I receive. And the mayor said, we would love to welcome you to this town. Please stay here as long as you like. You are very welcome in a welcome addition to our beautiful town. So our way of looking at the world can affect our environment in very real ways. So this teaching, this world is a Saha world for living beings, but the Pure Land for Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. When we learn to dwell happily in the present moment and nourish our joy, nourish our gratitude in every moment, then every moment is the Pure Land. But when we are filled with anger towards others, filled with hatred in our heart, even hatred towards ourselves, then this Pure Land becomes the Saha world, kind of full of pain and sorrow, sadness. It's all based on our mind. So the first line, retribution, consists of body, mind, and environment, and is both individual and collective. That is for our insight. That is to cultivate the insight of the interbeing nature of our actions, the nature of how we hold our mind, how do we take care of our mind. And the second line is the retribution. Of course, we can just survive in the world. We can get the food to eat. If we look at the world as a place where we just want to survive, we just kind of claw our way, get the food we need, the house we need, and be damned everyone else. That is how we enter the Saha world. The world around us then becomes this world of dust and pain and sorrow. But to what extent we practice gratitude, nourishing joy, increasing our capacity to dwell happily in the present moment, then the Pure Land is there. And in any day, we can go back and forth. In any moment, we can jump from one to the other. For a moment, we are lost in a storm of regrets about the past, and we find ourselves in the Saha world. And we look around us, and we see only broken things in the world. We see things that are not being taken care of. We see pain and suffering. But then we breathe in and out in mindfulness. We touch bodhicitta, the mind of awakening. We become a part-time Buddha. Because we all have the capacity to be a part-time Buddha, if we can't be full-time. Actually, if you just increase the hours of a part-time Buddha, eventually it becomes a full-time Buddha. There's no like special kind of secret esoteric teaching that you have to cross over and get in order to go from a part-time Buddha to a full-time Buddha. It just, you increase the hours, right? And you start out with like maybe 9 hours a week. Then you say, oh, I like this, being a part-time Buddha. I'm going to maybe increase my hours to 20 hours a week, and then 30, and then 40, and then somebody who like works for a big tech company nowadays in the US, you work 80, 90 hours a week, right? But that's as a living being in the Saha world, right? But what if you increase the hours of the day that you are a part-time Buddha? 80, 90 hours a week, that's an overtime Buddha. So Tai gave that teaching on the part-time Buddha many times, because he tried to break down our ideas about Buddha. It's a different way. The Master Linchi said, if you see the Buddha on the street, kill the Buddha. So that's just a way. But I think Tai's way is a little bit more gentle. Very strong, but gentle. It means we don't want to create an idea of Buddha that separates ourselves from Buddha, from awakening. We need to see that enlightenment, it lives in every cell of our body. And that's one moment of that, we are a 1 second Buddha. If we have that insight for 5 seconds, we are a 5 second Buddha. And we just increase until we become a full-time Buddha. only occasionally going back to the Saha world, so we don't forget to practice. Maybe we can listen to another sound of the bell. In many of the previous classes, I shared about how our mind creates subject and object, and this teaching is to help us to understand consciousness. We cannot be conscious of, we're not just conscious, but we're always conscious of something. Consciousness is consciousness of something. Mindfulness is mindfulness of something. And a moment of consciousness always includes subject and object. Originally, there is a whole experience, reality, you might call it. And then the moment we are aware of a particular object, subject and object appear simultaneously. So just as I draw this line through the circle, the moment there's a line, we create two. So when I look at this marker, my eye consciousness interacts with the photons bouncing off of this marker. That is originally not two. It is originally undivided and whole. But when my eye becomes aware of the shape of the marker and its colors, then suddenly the mind creates a subject and object. And there then can appear the idea that this marker is not me, but the subject, the one experiencing it, that is me, the subject. And this is the origin of so much suffering. Not because of the experience of consciousness itself, but because we tend to then create ideas that we grasp onto. We call it double grasping. The double grasping of subject and object. We think this subject that experiences is something separate from the object which is experienced. In this case, the marker is what is experienced, and the subject is my eye consciousness experiencing it. But then I actually make, in a self-reflexive way, an idea of myself, which is a subject. And that subject is now the object of my awareness. The self being self-aware of its own selfness. As this kind, if we become habituated to this kind of way of looking at the world, as the subject and object being separate from each other, when we see another person suffer, we feel, what does this have to do with me? We cut ourselves off from the object of our perception, and we see, I am not suffering, this person is suffering. They're suffering because of things they've done in the past, but that has nothing to do with me. And that is kind of wrong thinking. When we understand deeply this teaching of retribution, because this body-mind construct is also the environment. So those loved ones around us, in this case the environment, they are also us. They are a product of our own actions of body, speech, and mind. So when a loved one suffers, or even a stranger suffers, we see in the street, that is we can practice when we go deeply in our practice of realizing the Pure Land in the present moment, to see that that person and their suffering are not separate from me. I remember when I was a young novice and I hadn't penetrated this teaching yet. And I still believe that what I experience is just the fruit of my own personal actions. I have a self that is an individual, and because of those things that I've done in the past, I am experiencing the fruit in the present moment. And I remember that I was working in the registration office in Plum Village, and one of the brothers I was working with, he had misplaced a check that was for a sum of money people had paid to stay at Plum Village. And he became very agitated because he couldn't find that check. And he tried looking for it everywhere. At the time I didn't know it had gotten lost, so I didn't know what he was doing. But then later, after a few days, and he thought maybe he had put it under his mattress in his room. Anyway, he spent many days in a lot of agitation and worry because he couldn't find that check. And eventually brought it out to the elder brothers and said, I cannot find this check. I think it was for like 2,000 euros or something. So it was some sum of money. And he felt so upset with himself. And the elder brothers then had the three of us who were working in the office come up in front of the Sangha to begin anew, to ask for forgiveness for this misplaced check. And when I heard that I had to do that, I felt not at ease in my heart. I said, I told myself, I'm not the one who lost the check. You know, that brother is the one who lost it. I didn't say that, but that's what I felt in my heart. And my elder brother gave me a very beautiful teaching. He says, we are all this teaching, that we are all co-responsible for what happens in the world. We cannot just say, I have nothing to do with this. The energy that we create together, the mindfulness of working that we create in the office, is not an individual matter. We all contributed to it. So what I'm doing in the office and my way of doing it, in some way also contributed to the check being misplaced. And that is true for all three of us who are working in the office. And I reflected after. It took me a while to kind of digest that teaching, but now I see it very clearly. Especially as I get to be an older brother in the community, I start to see that my actions and thoughts are not separate from my brothers. And what we, how I take care of my mind in every moment is contributing to the harmony, but also the conflict and discord that occurs in the community, here at Deer Park or in the international Plum Village community. And so I become take much greater care of my thinking and my speech. There's still anger, wrong perceptions, I know, but I go deeply and I see that I need to take care of it because this has real effects in the world. My own thinking is not an individual matter. How I take care of my body and mind is going out into the community. And so when my brother hurts himself in a working meditation, I see that I'm also co-responsible. We can go to the other extreme and say, take all the blame on ourselves. And that is not completely correct either. So Tai had offered us a mantra, you are partially right. When somebody blames us for creating suffering, making them suffer, we can say, you are partially right. I have contributed something to the suffering you're experiencing. But that also invites them to reflect back on how they are also partially responsible for their suffering. And it becomes a practice on both sides. And we increase the level of mindfulness in the collective consciousness. I very much enjoy that mantra. I don't say it too many times because I feel like maybe somebody might take it, but maybe in a way that maybe they're not ready to receive that. But when I feel like somebody is open and somebody is a practitioner, and they come and actually we don't point the finger too much directly at each other in Deer Park, so I haven't found the occasion to say it, but in my heart, when I hear somebody say something very absolute, like they know the truth, I always in my heart say, you're partially right. I know that there's more than to just absolute statements. There are always more causes and conditions, more, not just one person has contributed to that accident or that painful situation. We are all contributing to it. And so when I look in that way, then I can actually contribute through my thinking, through my words, ways of healing the situation, rather than just continuing to treat it as an object, separate from myself as a subject. So the practice is to recognize that this is the nature of the default nature of our consciousness. Our eye coming in contact with forms, our ears coming in contact with sounds. In rapid fire successions, I think we say in kshana, very many times per second, this kind of dualistic consciousness is arising. And what we learn to do is to not grasp onto it. When we grasp onto that dualistic consciousness and we try to make it permanent, and then this dualistic way of looking at the world, good and bad, black and white, just continues, and this is really the basis of almost all of our suffering, this dualism. So we try to cultivate what we call the wisdom of non-discrimination. when this natural process of dualistic consciousness arises, we see that we cannot grasp onto it. It is like the Buddha said, it's like a bubble or a shooting star or a magic show. A moment of consciousness manifests, and we just treat it as something ephemeral. It just comes and goes. In fact, our consciousness is of a, Tai always reminded us that our consciousness is of a cinematographic nature. It is like individual frames on a roll of film. And we experience it as a continuous awareness because it's going so quickly. But all of these impressions coming into our senses are just creating this kind of light and sound and smell and touch show, like a kind of movie. And when we see that, we don't grasp onto it anymore. We just allow it. It's manifesting as a wonder, and we are just aware of it. And we rest and dwell in non-discriminative awareness. And I've talked about this a number of times. We call nirvikalpa jnana. The knowing that is not discriminating. Vikalpa is not it's like kalpa is to create, to make something. So we don't make anything. That's why we train with mindful breathing, just to be aware of the breath coming in and out. We don't try to change the breath. Our awareness of the breath naturally allows the breath to go deeper, but we don't control or try to force the breathing. That's a training, so we see as well our experience of seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, and thinking is like that too. It comes and goes according to how we nourish ourselves, what objects of sense we come in contact with. And then we learn how to make changes in how we consume through our senses. Rather than trying to force our thinking to do this or that, we go right to the root, which is the fuel that nourishes our consciousness. Right? I talked many times earlier about the I. Let's do something. Comes in contact with the form. Candle, and that gives rise to I consciousness. So the contact is what gives rise to the contact between the sense and the object creates subject and object with I consciousness. That is how we nourish our body and mind and our environment. And that nourishment gives rise to a retribution. What we're experiencing right now, it is the product of how we've nourished our eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, consciousness as food in the past, up until this present moment. And not only our individual but also the collective. So how our ancestors, our parents, our teachers, our friends. This is, I find very, very helpful because it's how I can transform the world. It's how I can transform the situation. If we act as individual practitioners, we come together as a collective, practicing this teaching, looking deeply into our present moment situation, and see how we've been nourishing ourselves through our eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. We can actually understand how to change the collective behavior so that we can reduce the suffering of future generations. Recently, when I was in India, many of you may have heard about the heat wave. There was temperatures going over 114 degrees Fahrenheit in the middle of the day in around Delhi. And the brothers and I were there during that heat wave. And of course our host had put us into a hotel, or not a hotel, it was actually an apartment complex in some friends of the Sangha. And throughout the day, the heat was so high that even we just turned on the AC very lightly to keep it at like 80, 90 degrees inside, but it was constantly getting shut off. The electricity was getting overwhelmed. And I think it was happening throughout the entire building and throughout all of Delhi. They were struggling to generate enough electricity to run the air conditioning, to keep just at even a very warm temperature. And some friends they were writing and saying, are you okay? We heard about the heat wave. And I heard mention of someone said, oh, this is just like in the book Ministry for the Future. I don't know if anyone's ever have read this book. But so I had to look it up. I didn't know what they were talking about. But this is a science fiction writer who focuses on very near and hard science around climate change, especially in this book. And a few years ago, he had written a book called Ministry for the Future. And because countries refuse to live by the restrain their consumption of fossil fuels to the Accords of Paris in 2015. So eventually, in the COP meetings, they decided to create a ministry for the future. And that ministry would be international, and it would fight for the rights of future generations. Right now, we try to hear the rights of all the countries in the world, and at least on the surface, we try to come up with an accord that can meet and be respectful of the rights of people all over the planet. But what about future generations who have not yet manifested? How about their rights? In our way of consuming, how are we violating their human rights in the Declaration of Human Rights? And so the premise of the book is that this ministry for the future needs to look and see how to deal with policy in the present moment that will support future generations to keep their right to live and be free, just as we have been able to do on planet Earth. And in the beginning of that book, I have to say I have not read the whole book, but I was reading the beginning of it, and it was not easy. The beginning of the book is about a heat wave that hits Delhi, India. So this was written a few years ago. And of course, it was a much more extreme heat wave with higher humidity, where it ends up that many millions of people die in this heat wave because they cannot keep all those people cool. People are standing in of course it's a fictional novel, but it's so close to what we came close to experiencing in Delhi. I mean, where birds were falling out of the sky from the heat, falling dead on the ground. Many elderly people dying because they cannot find a cool enough place in this heat wave. In the story, people are actually going into the lakes and standing there for days with just their head above water just to keep their body cool, because the humidity is so high that when they sweat, they cannot cool down. And it goes on from there. But I found that very provocative, this ministry for the future is very much in line with this teaching of retribution. How can we come together as a collective, taking on that responsibility, being our own ministry for the future, living in such a way that we can offer and respect the dignity and rights of future generations. That is what I realized. That's what I felt when I came to the Plum Village practice, to the Buddhist teaching, but also to the Plum Village practice. I felt this is the meeting of people. It's like a ministry for the future. By living happily in the present moment, we're learning how to take care of the future generations. We're learning to consume less. The monastic vow helps us to cut off our attachment to material things and learn to dwell happily in the present moment. We decide not to have families. Right? We eat simply together as a community. For me, these are all actions which help to make a future possible for the unborn generations who will in the future hopefully have some affection for us. But if we are not careful in our way of living, as we have not been, many of us, as a collective, then they may curse us and wonder how we could have been so insensitive. It is up to us in our way of living. We follow our teacher's teaching because of his insight and his care. Every day I look at the picture of my teacher in my room and I feel filled with gratitude that he has lived his life with such integrity and simplicity, and that I can look to that as an inspiration, because we need inspiring teachers. We need brothers and sisters on the path. Maybe you can't become a monk or a nun, but you can live more simply. You can enjoy just enjoy your breathing, enjoy the present moment, and enjoy knowing that you have community everywhere in the world who is also enjoying their breathing and enjoying living simply on the planet. That is it gives great hope to so many people. When we do that, they see that it is possible to have a beautiful, pure land, that there is a way to create a beautiful environment for future generations and a healthy body and mind. and they are all one. They are not separate. Okay, maybe that's enough for today. And for all of those friends who, as well, who are online, thank you for getting this far in the class. This is the 31st or 32nd class of this series, and it's it's beautiful to hear all the feedback and to continue to practice this together, this wonderful teaching of Thai. So we'll try to continue this summer to offer these teachings. And we don't have to get to 40, it's okay. 31, 32 is already good enough. But if we get to 40, it's also wonderful. Thank you.